we have here, I think, is tariffs and sanctions coming. Putin is a master at getting around sanctions. He pays a lot more attention to the battlefield effects and what Ukraine is able to do on that battlefield and defending successfully against them. But nonetheless, if they impose sanctions on secondary partners, that is, those that are buying Putin's oil and gas, particularly his oil, this is a one commodity economy, and that's China, India, Venezuela, Brazil, and a few other countries to a lesser degree. Then that revenue source that is sustaining the war for Putin begins to take its toll.
I want to start by considering, I think, the Middle East, really, and Israel and Gaza, and the suggestion that we've been reporting this week that Netanyahu actually is not going to stop at all anytime soon. In fact, is pursuing occupation of Gaza, according to reports at the time of speaking. What is your interpretation of that? Has Netanyahu lost control? Can he be restrained? Should he be restrained?
No, I don't think he should be restrained. I think what has happened here is been a fundamental breakdown in negotiations that have been going on for almost 2 months. I'm pretty familiar with the specifics of those negotiations through my own government and through the Israeli government. And Hamas, despite Israeli concessions that were made for a 60-day ceasefire in exchange of 20 living, about 10 hostages initially, living hostages, and about 12 or 15 deceased hostages in return for detainees and prisoners, and some other issues. Hamas continued to reject it, and I think where Prime Minister Netanyahu is, and I know where the United States government is that the objective now would be to pursue an end of war deal. But to get to an end of war deal where the Israelis pull out of Gaza and all hostages are returned and Hamas steps down as the governing power, we're a far cry from that. And to help get there, which is the objective that the Israeli government has, they want those hostages back, and they certainly want an end to this war. They believe given the frustration that they've seen dealing with Hamas over these several weeks that I pointed out, that the last thing they can do is to put more pressure on them. That's what the threat of an upcoming military campaign is all about: move as many of the Gazan peoples out of the way and to deal with that military campaign. And we've seen in the past, when there's pressure put on Hamas, they have a tendency to then come to the negotiating table. This is all about Hamas and their rejection of any sort of deal towards releasing those hostages. And listen, we all know why they took the hostages: to guarantee their own survival. And as we get down to 20 living hostages, that's the crucible that we're operating with here. And this is an attempt to still force that Hamas's hand.
Yeah. I'm reminded of comments made by President Biden back in October 2023 after the terror atrocity committed by Hamas, where he told Israel not to repeat the mistakes made by the US after 9/11. Is Israel at risk of repeating those mistakes?
I don't know what mistakes he's talking about. The United States went to Afghanistan and deposed the Taliban, and was providing host to the Al-Qaeda, who killed 3,000 Americans. The only mistake we made is we didn't pursue the Al-Qaeda into Pakistan and finish it. We did get distracted and moved into Iraq. But in terms of responding to the hell that was imposed on the United States and the American people, I think the response was really quite accurate. So I don't know what Biden's talking about.
Interesting. So then, I suppose when we consider President Trump's role in all of this, do you still believe that he is the world leader who can exert influence on Netanyahu? And what influence should he exert? For example, do we need to suggest that there needs to be a timeline on this, an end point on this conflict?
Well, we've tried to impose timelines, not the United States, but put timelines and negotiate 60-day ceasefire, something that would be easier to do. And that's blown up in our faces, given Hamas's rejectionist attitude. They have a very close relationship. Virtually every munition that Israel used in its attack on Iran was from the United States. When President Trump took over, there had been restrictions imposed on ammunition by the Biden administration, some of that announced, some of that unannounced. And he said, what do you need? And Netanyahu's people told us, and he said, give them everything that they need to do. He fully supported how he conducts operations, that is Netanyahu and his generals. He didn't get into micromanaging them. I thought it was absolute absurdity for people in the White House of the United States trying to dictate to an allied partner how to conduct a war, which they know nothing about themselves and are unqualified to even suggest such things. But nonetheless, they went ahead and did. I think the relationship is much improved. President Trump is not going to dictate how to do military operations. He wants an end to the war. And that's what they talk about, how best to end this conflict, how best to stop the suffering, how best to stop the killing. That's what President Trump is working with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and they have a very solid relationship. And I think there's a little bit of give and take in that relationship, as you would expect.
And so is occupation of Gaza the way to bring peace?
Well, I don't think it's a permanent occupation. People are going to focus on that. Israel can't permanently occupy Gaza. They don't have the military to do that. They can't sustain an effort like that. Most of the Israeli military is in the reserves and not on active duty. They normally come in for 40, 50 days at a time. And those reserve soldiers are integral to the economy and prosperity that Israel enjoys in the private sector. So there's no permanent occupation going to take place here. This is about a military. I know the word occupation is being used, but it's certainly not going to be a permanent one. This is a military operation. I'm sure the Israelis have a time limit imposed. They're not exactly going to announce that to anybody in terms of what they intend to do here. So I don't see it as permanent. I see it as completely temporary and to put pressure on Hamas to come to the negotiating table realistically.
Yeah. Let's turn our attention, if we may, General, to considering Russia's war in Ukraine. And to, I suppose, work out where we are at here. And I guess one of the things to consider here is Trump's deadline that he has put on a ceasefire in this context, which actually is this Friday, the 8th of August, which Putin seems to have dismissed. He doesn't seem to pay much attention to these sorts of changeable deadlines that Trump issues. What is the merit in Trump saying these things? Is there any?
Yeah, well, I think what we've seen is, much as the operation we saw against Iran by Israel, the United States and President Trump is quite decisive in supporting Israel. And obviously there are options he had in not doing that, and he chose to support them. And by all accounts, it seems to be the right answer. And the same thing has happened here. I mean, President Trump was expecting to make a deal with Putin. This thing turned out to be much more challenging than I think he expected to be, because he felt he knew Putin pretty well. But I've had the opportunity to talk to him on a number of occasions about it. And one of the things I told him, the president that is the Putin you're dealing with today is different than the Putin you dealt with in the past. He's a wartime commander. He staked his presidency on taking control of Ukraine in a couple of weeks. He's into his 41st month, heading towards his 42nd month, 3+ years into a war, and he doesn't have a lot to show for it. He's got about 20% of the territory somewhat under his control, and he's losing casualties in the neighborhood of the high 40s, 45, 48,000 a month, 35, 39,000 last year. And he's very much challenged by what is taking place here. And he's going to be, he wants major concessions out of the Ukrainians, and that's why he's delaying this and putting pressure on them. And that is why he escalated the war, principally on civilians. He's killed over 13,000 Ukrainian civilians. They don't get the attention they deserve to get in this war. And also, he expected President Trump to get frustrated by it and walk away from supporting Ukraine. He did accomplish part of that. Putin, that is, President Trump did get frustrated, very much so. but he's not walking away. He made a decision to support Ukraine through military assistance, and now on the cusp of uh, August the 8th, another deadline. And as we saw in Israel, Iran, if Iran didn't come to the negotiating table in 60 days, then bad things would happen to them. On the 61st day, President Trump acted. So what we have here, I think, is tariffs and sanctions coming. Putin is a master at getting around sanctions. He pays a lot more attention to the battlefield effects and what Ukraine is able to do on that battlefield and defending successfully against them. But nonetheless, if they impose sanctions on secondary partners, that is, those that are buying uh, Putin's oil and gas, particularly his
Mhm.
oil, this is a one commodity economy. And that's China, India, Venezuela, Brazil, and a few other countries to a lesser degree. Then that revenue source that is sustaining the war for Putin begins to take its toll. It won't happen immediately, but it will happen much more significantly than what it is today.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, especially because we've heard even in the last 24 hours that Trump is going to increase tariffs on India as something of a punishment, I suppose, really, for exactly as you say, the purchasing of Russian oil. I wonder if we can consider then whether, in your conversations with the president that you've outlined there, have you noticed an evolution of his strategy towards Putin in the 6 or 7 months that he has been in office? Has he had to adapt?
Yeah, but I don't get involved in discussing what he what he says. I mentioned a couple of things what I would say, and
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that. It's as far as I'm concerned, those are his conversations, not mine. But just looking at it, you can see that uh, dealing with Putin and and President Trump's personal diplomacy, uh, he certainly understood going into those
Mm.
negotiations who Putin really is. He just chooses not to characterize Putin as the thug and killer and war criminal that he really is, because President Trump, more than any president I've observed, believes in personal diplomacy with adversaries and maintaining a good relationship, even though your values are different, even though your national interests are different, and even though your bona fide adversaries are indeed maybe even enemies. He attempts to try to maintain a relationship in the hope that you can make some progress in negotiations. I think the degree that he does that is a little bit more than most presidents have done in the past, and that's him. Uh, and he's going to continue to do that. But certainly his appreciation for who Putin is, I think he knew who he is when he went into the negotiations, and certainly he has evolved dealing with Putin and his steadfastness and his unwillingness to back away from the war, despite the horrific casualties that the Russians are taking, which is
Mm.
significantly higher than what the Ukrainians are taking. And I'm assuming that the president has come to the conclusion that many of us do, looking at this, that Putin has never cared about the casualties his own military forces take in any of the conflicts that he's been involved in, and that's just the way it is. He pays attention to his population, to be sure, and he still enjoys support from his population for this war, because he characterizes the war as the United States and the West encroaching on the sovereignty of Russia and denying Russia the kind of role as a major country in the world that it should have, and its own sphere of influence in the world. And the United States and the West are
Mm.
denying Russia that, and that is why this war is actually going on. And by and large, many people receiving that message day in and day out believe it and continue to support Putin in these efforts.
Yeah. General Jack Keane, thank you very much. Thank you for your time.